Thank you so much for joining me again here at the Artlife YouTube channel. My aim here is to show you lots of different varying ways to have fun with art, either in the classroom or at home, and inspire you and give you ideas to be creative. Today, we're going to do some technical watercolour techniques and create an artwork that looks something like this. Now, I love teaching watercolours, and you probably can tell that because I've done a lot of watercolour tutorials in the past, so feel free to check those out if you would like some beginning steps to using watercolours. This particular bird picture is a little bit more advanced. We go over blending techniques, working with wet on wet techniques, as well as painting wet on dry techniques, filling a space and working really neatly and adding details. So this is a more technical watercolour task, and I guide you along to create a beautiful bird picture just like this. So stay tuned, I'll show you how right now. This is a watercolour task, and I'll be teaching you some different techniques using watercolours. So a palette of colourful watercolours is your main material you need for today. I'm going to be working on a canvas board that I've gotten from Zart Art. However, you could use some watercolour paper instead. You'll also need some clean water and a brush. And one extra thing you'll need is a grey lead pencil just to draw your image prior to painting. So gather your materials and let's get started. All right. So today the aim is to create a large bird that we're going to paint in watercolours. Now, obviously the first step would be to sketch or draw your image. Now, what's really important to note, and I'll do this on a separate piece of paper, is that when we're drawing, if you imagine this is the space here, you need to try to take up most of the page. If you're to draw just a really small bird on your paper or canvas, the composition isn't as effective as it could be. For example, you have your subject very tiny, and that means that the background here is taking up too much space. So if you're wanting to do a small bird, I suggest you do lots of small birds like this, so that your composition is filled and the viewer's eye moves around the page. But today, what I want to encourage you to do is create a large bird. So if your paper is this big, you're going to try to create a bird that takes up majority of the page like this, meaning that the background is taking up a minority of the paper. So, because we're using watercolours today, when we're drawing, we need to sketch extremely lightly. Watercolours are translucent, which means they are see-through, and if you draw in a really dark, sort of heavy way like this, you're going to see those lines, and it's going to make your artwork not look as neat as if you were to sketch lightly. So there's definitely a difference between drawing and sketching. Sketching uses small little lines that are light, they're thoughtful, and they can be rubbed out very easily if you're making a mistake. So I'm going to draw directly onto my canvas today. This is what I'll be using, but of course you could use watercolour paper if that's all you have. And the design of your bird is up to you. You might choose to have a bird sitting, in which case it would look different to a bird that's flying with its wings out. Now we can, if you have a look at some bird images on the internet, that will help you to draw. I think it makes a lot of sense to draw from a picture rather than draw from memory. And so even now I have my computer open next to me and I'm having a look at an image of the type of bird that I'm wanting to depict today. So when it comes to drawing, it's important to simplify your image into simpler shapes. So that means that if I'm doing, say, the body of my bird, I'm actually going to do two birds today because I want to show you the difference between one sitting and one standing. So I'm going to do a sitting bird here, and if you consider its body, I'm sketching for myself now just an oval shape. Now we also need a head shape. Again, sketching really lightly. You'll need a bit of a wing sort of shape. You could, obviously different birds have different shaped wings and things like that. So you would need to look at your image that you've chosen. It needs a tail. And then it'll have its feet here. It also has a little beak, of course. But this is my basic shape. When it comes to drawing a bird that is flying, I'll do this out here. Again, I'll need an oval for the body. We'll need a circle for the head. But its wings sort of come out like this. And its tail will be behind it. So I've given you two examples of birds here, and its feet will sort of dangle there. Now, you may choose to do a composition like mine where you've got more than one, in which case you'll do them smaller. In the event that you're just going to focus on one bird today, you'll make them quite large in the middle of your page here. Now, for now, this is the only detail you need with your pencil. We're going to try to fill in the rest with our watercolours. Now, there's lots of different techniques I need to show you with watercolours. There's something called wet on wet or painting on dry, and it's really different depending on what stage of the bird you are doing. So grab some clean water. I'm going to start with a bird just here. You need to choose your colour scheme, and I'm going to do a realistic one today. And to start off with, just going to give my bird a bit of an overall kind of colour. I'm going to make this quite a watery colour. You can see I'm adding quite a lot of water here, but I'm sticking within sort of the shape of my bird. This is a fairly advanced watercolour tutorial. So if you would like to sort of get some basics prior to doing this task, I suggest you have a look at my previous videos. I do a lot of watercolour basics. Yeah, but this one's probably on the trickier side. So I've done a fairly basic colour. This is my first layer, and you'll notice it's fairly watery. So I've used a high level of water for this. I've used a bit of a darker kind of section here to show a bit of shadow, which was my intention. So there are areas that are darker. So I'm going to create the shadow on the left-hand side of my artwork, suggesting that the light is coming from the top here. All right, so I'm going to use sort of oranges and browns for this beautiful little bird here. I might use a little bit of blue too. So now that my background color is wet, we want to make sure it is still wet. You can apply more water if it has dried out. I'm going to add some orange to the belly here. Now, you'll notice that the color is spreading, and that's what we want it to do. This is called wet on wet painting, and the colors merge really beautifully. And that's what we're wanting. That's why we need sort of a canvas, something thick, or some watercolor paper for this task, because you do need to be able to add quite a bit of water and extra paint to it. So I'm going to continue that to the head and sort of the belly, and I want a nice sort of blended line here. We don't want it to go just from orange to brown. You can see that it's sort of blending in a really natural sort of way there. If that's not happening for you, if you're getting a really distinct line, just add a line of water and you'll notice that the colours will spread out a little bit better. This brown to be wet, so I'm going to add a layer of water there, and I want some blue for my bird's tail here, and hopefully you can see the effect a little bit easier with the blue. All right, notice it's quite a distinct line and I don't want that. I want it to blend, so I'm going to add some water now and get those colours to really merge and play together like that. I don't want this either. Can you see that that's not merged very well? I need to add some water there, and you can see that the colours will start to blend more naturally. So this is just our second layer now. Our first layer was the brown under coating, I suppose. This is some blended colour over the top. And once this dries, that's when we can create some details with a technique called wet on dry. So we need to completely let that dry. I'm also not going to do the beak or anything yet because I don't want the colours to merge. We're just doing the body. I'm going to move on to my second bird now. All right, we're going to start off and do a similar technique with my flying bird here. I'm just going to add a really light colour. Notice that even though I've sketched, you can still see my pencil marks. So I'll aim to try and get rid of those down the track. So you can have some areas a little bit on the darker side, which means I'm using quite a bit of the paint, you can see there. And then in other areas, it's pretty much just water. The idea with this is not to just purely colour in. I'll show you what I mean. If I just use my paint and that's it, you know, looks fine, but there's no tone to it. There's no sense of value or lighting. And that's when the water sort of comes into play. If I can use areas with higher level of water, it means other areas have higher level of paint, and it gives that change in colour, a darker area and a lighter area. Now we have two wings here, but we want a distinction between the two of them. At the moment they look like they're attached. The way we do that is by adding tone, as I was saying before. You can see that just adding a little bit more pink there, making this part of the wing darker, it tends to separate them a little bit more, which is what we want. While I add in some of the colours I see in my photo for this particular bird. So notice the colours will blend and bleed at the moment because my background's still wet. And that's okay. If it's doing something you don't really want it to do, you can always grab a tissue and dab the colours, or you can sort of move them away with a bit of water. If you're finding the colours are just combining too much and going just a gross colour, that's probably when you need the tissue to get rid of the colour and sort of start again. Don't suggest you do that too many times though. The next thing I'd like for us to do is consider the background. So at the moment, obviously I've just got a very plain white background. We don't need to add a lot of detail, but we do need to add colour. So before we add any other details, we're going to fill the background with a really lovely, washy kind of green. That's what I'm choosing to do because I'm suggesting that these birds are in a tree. So I'm just going to use the different mixture of greens that I have to fill my background completely. Now I am also using a lot of water. That's what makes it sort of washy like this. If you just use one green, it will look quite flat. So, you know, really practice your blending skills now. So for example, in this section, I'm adding some water to my light green and my turquoise here, making them kind of combine, doing a bit of a dabby sort of technique like this to suggest, you know, the leaves of a tree. Try not to overwork each area. The colors can mix together and then you don't end up with that color variation. So add a little bit and move down. The yellow also looks really nice and combines well in this situation with the green, little highlights. Don't forget your water. Now when I'm coming up to my bird here, I need to be quite careful to get this edge really clean. I don't want to paint over the top of my bird there or take away from it, just up to it. So to recap what we've done so far, we've painted a layer for each bird, then a second layer over the top using blending and allowed that to dry. We've then covered the entire background in a green sort of tree-like background to fill the white space. Now that everything is dried, we're able to do our details, and it's important to have a detailed small brush for this part or something with a fine tip like the brush I have right now. So the types of details that can be added are little outlines, I guess. You can see that now when I'm painting over the top, my colors are not blending. Now that's happening because it's now dry. So we're painting wet paint onto a dry background, and that means that we can add details like I'm doing now. My paint is not watery. I've not made it watery on purpose because I want that crisp, detailed line. This part of the task really does take quite a lot of concentration. I suggest that you have a photo of the bird that you're trying to depict in front of you so that you can notice and look at its details. The types of details, you know, I'm wanting to add here obviously are these lines on the tails and the wings that this particular bird has. And it just makes it stand out from the background as well. Paint it really lightly with a high density of water first, just to make sure that you're happy with what it looks like, and then you can lock it in with a darker colour. I really hope you found creating your birds really therapeutic and relaxing. It's all about layering your watercolours, adding details once the watercolours have dried and creating an overall composition that works together really nicely. Don't forget to sign your name down the bottom, and I hope you've enjoyed the task. So it's as simple as that. I really hope you've been able to create an artwork that you're really proud of and that illustrates really good watercolour skills. Feel free to tag me in any photos that you've created of your artwork at Artlife Art Lessons on Facebook or at artlife.melb on Instagram, and follow my socials there. As well as like this page and subscribe below and ring the bell if you would like to get notifications of any future videos. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope you've enjoyed this watercolour task.